In this next tutorial for Animation Master, what we're going to do is we're going to look at choreographies in Animation Master. Now, a choreography, when you start a new project, you'll notice this folder that says choreographies. A choreography is like a scene in other programs. Like in Maya, it's your MB. In XSI, it's your SCN file. So that's where you put all of your pieces together. And your objects folder is where you have all your models, your lights, your cameras, everything that you're using is in your objects folder. Your actions would be animations if you want to, or you can animate in your choreography. In the choreography, to create one, all you do is you double click on it. You can either go File, New Choreography, or you can just double click Choreographies and it opens it up. Now this is the default choreography that comes with Hash. What it has is, you'll notice it just looks like this. If I open it up, you'll see shortcut to camera, shortcut to key light, shortcut to fill light, shortcut to rim, and shortcut to ground. Now these things are objects, and these are just shortcuts in that choreography. Now if I open up my objects folder, you'll notice there's camera 1, key light, fill light, rim light, and ground. And say I rename this, well, I'd have to reset or save it as something else. But anyways, if I, instead of my rim light, I name it rim 2, you'll notice the shortcut changed to rim 2. Now these shortcuts are getting all of their properties from these objects. So if I look in here at my rim light, you'll notice it's got the transform, it's got bone position, all this kind of stuff. Type, I can change it from a bulb to a cleag to a sun. Bulb is a point light, cleag is a spotlight, and sun is a directional light. I can give it a width, I can get a softness, all this kind of stuff. That's actually changing the original object. And you'll notice if I go down to the shortcut to rim light, I can open it up and it has the exact same thing. Now, anything that has black in it is just active. The other ones aren't. They're grayed out, but I can animate that. And so if I change it, if I change active on and I'm on frame 0 to active off, you'll notice that a key was put in there. And if I go here, you'll notice there's a key there now for it. So in my choreography, in these objects, I can change attributes to anything that's in here, but you have to realize that it's being animated when you change those. So if I have it on here, because I want to see it, I don't want to see it here, so I'm going to turn it off. And then when I come over here, I'm going to turn it on again. It's setting keys for that, and you'll notice right here in the corner of the screen, you can see that light on and off. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to delete these two keys right here, select them and hit delete. Okay, now it went back to just its default. So that's one thing you have to be careful of in choreographies. Now one thing you can do is you can, this is called the animate button or animate mode. If I go to 2 on the numpad, you'll notice I'm going to go to my front view and hit Shift Z. It frames everything that's in the scene. Now here's my spotlight right here. When I have my animate mode button down, let me go into graph mode here and let me just delete everything. I'm going to open up the shortcut, and under actions I'm just going to delete the entire actions folder there. Okay, now what it did is it put it right back to the origin because I deleted the animation data that was on it. So I'm actually going to move it back. So I'm going to do this. If I want to animate it, I can move it, and you'll see it's creating keys. And I go to frame 10, and I want to go over here. Now it's creating animation data. But say I don't want it to animate, I just want to move it without changing the animation or offset it. What I'm going to do is delete this stuff, go back right here, hold animate down, or take it off, and then I'm going to change the light. I'm going to go into my side view, rotate it down like this, and then my front view, rotate it like this. Now when I want something, when I want a light to point at something, say I want it to point at the camera, what I'll do is I'll grab that end of it to rotate it and just point right at it like that. Go into my other view, do the same thing. So grab it, rotate it, point right there. So now you can see it's somewhat pointing towards it, but because I'm kind of on an angle, just want to do this. Oops. rotate. Kind of want to get it to point at that. Okay, so I just use that as kind of a get there quick. Now, one thing in a choreography, so animate mode, it just offset those keys. And so I don't need to worry about if I come out here and I animate it again, you can see how the keys don't move. It doesn't create a key anywhere, it just offsets it from the original. So you'll use that very rarely, but I use it once in a while, but I just leave it checked down. You have to get used to really making sure that when you're moving things that you're on the keyframe that you want in a choreography. You'll notice when I did that, I didn't create any keys, and so there's no action underneath it. All the rest of these have actions, which is just a placement. So it's wherever they're placed in the world. You can add things in here, so I can objects, new light. I can create a new light, drag it, and drop it into the choreography, and it comes in at the origin, and then I can just move it to wherever I want, like that. Let me just refresh this stuff. Okay, so you can see they have actions now too. And you can add any object in. You can add instances of it. So if I put in the light again, it says shortcut to light 1, 2. Shortcut to light 1, 3. So one thing I can do is I can grab all these lights here and I can start messing with them individually. Open up my properties here, take the transform. Say I want the color of this one to be green. I want the light here to be pink and 3 to be blue. Okay, well now I've got a green light, a pink light, and a blue light, but that's only in the choreography. If I go back to this light, you'll notice that it's still white. Only the lights in the choreography have changed, and that's because I gave them keyframes, or I gave them data in the choreography themselves. So I'm just going to delete that out, delete that out, delete that out. So now I'm back to my original choreography. So in your choreography, you'll notice when I open up something, you'll see a folder that says actions. Your actions hold what's called choreography actions, or they can hold individual actions. So if let's say I grab or I double click actions, and let me close it real quick here, and then say edit using ground. Okay, so now I've got an action where there's the ground. Okay. It doesn't have any bones in it, so I'm just going to hit muscle mode, and I'm going to go hit N and just move it up. Okay, so the only thing that's animated in the ground are the splines. Well, let's close that down, and this action now, I can put it on the ground, on the shortcut to ground, and now the shortcut to ground has an action, and it's got a shortcut to that action right there. I hope all these shortcuts are making sense to you. But anyways, you can take any of your objects, plop them into your choreography, animate them as you please without changing the original object, and then you can also take actions and drop them on something. So if I have, let's say I already have an action of a walk cycle and the wheel model, I can bring the wheel model, drop it into choreography, grab the action for the walk, and drop it on the wheel model, and then he will walk inside the choreography. So for example, if I right click on objects, say import model, and I navigate to the wheel model, open him up, close that window. I'm actually going to go up to view and go down to workbook, and what that does is it gives me the tabs down below. And then in actions, right click, say import action, and I'm going to grab the walk that we did in a previous tutorial. And now you'll notice if I grab Will, I can drag him and drop him on the choreography. He appears in the choreography. And then I can grab the walk, and I can drag it and drop it on Will. Now, just so the ground doesn't move, I'm going to delete the actions from the ground. Okay. So now I've just got all of this stuff right here. Now I'm going to hit 1 on the numpad. That looks through the camera. 2 is front, 4 is left, 6 is right, 8 is top, or 8 is back, 5 is top, and 0 is bottom. 1 is through the camera, and if you have multiple cameras, it will cycle through the camera. 7 is your bird's eye view in orthographic mode, and 3 is looking through a light. So if I toggle, I'm looking through all 3 lights. That's my spotlight, one of my directional lights, my other directional light. So I'm just going to go back to camera view, hit 0 to show shaded wireframe. Actually, I'm just going to hit 9 to go to shaded mode. Now, you'll notice that he's walking, and if I click on shortcut to will, you'll notice in your timeline here that in the shortcut to will, he has actions, and this is the length of one of those, of the one walking action. So if I scrub this, you'll notice there's his walk that we did in the previous tutorial. Okay. So it's 40 frames long. Well, if I go down to it, if I go to the properties for it, it shows a crop range, which tells me where does the action start and where does it end. It starts at frame 0 and ends at frame 40. The choreography range is where does it start within the choreography. So if I hit 10, it starts at frame 10. I can grab it and I can select it and move it around, and you can see that change. I'm just going to go back to 0. Cycle length is 40. Now that's because there's only one cycle. So if I want to repeat it, I say 2, and it will duplicate it right there. So there's 2. So now he'll walk 2 times, or he'll go through the cycle twice. So if I have my character that's just doing a walk cycle and I want to do a rotation, I'll have it repeat probably 10 times. If I think 40 frames, 30 frames a second, that's a little over a second. I want the rotation to be about 15 seconds. So so I don't quite want to do 15 repeats on it. I'll probably do 12. Okay. So as I zoom out, you can see that's 480 frames. So if I just hit play, you'll notice how he's just going through his walk cycle, repeating, and you can see how these are just stacked one on top of the other. Now I can grab another action, maybe it's a different action, and I can grab it and drop it on will again, and it puts another one in there. Now by default, if I look at shortcut to will, it put it at the end of this action. Well, I can grab this and I can drag it anywhere along here. Now it's just gonna, and then I can choose what type of blending that's going to go on this action. If I grab it and look at it, blend method is replace, so it's going to replace whatever is going on below it. So if I want to have it replace, I can grab this walk, drop it back into actions, and then you can see it's on top. And so it will replace whatever keyframes are right here, it will replace. So I'm just going to delete it. Oops, wrong one. So that's how you can kind of stack some actions in there. You can do things like have a walk cycle and then have his arm wave, and you can stack that on and put a replace on it. And so what it'll do is he'll be walking, and then it will grab a hold of those bones and replace the motion. So you can have him walking and then wave his hand. A lot of those tutorials are on the Hash website for free. You can see how you do that. But this is just kind of a brief understanding of how choreographies work. So I've got that action in there. Now there's also something called a choreography action. So I've got just my action that's repeating here, and if I right click on actions, I say new choreography action. What it is here is it's created an empty action for me that will be housed within the choreography. So if I click on will now, see how this check mark is on the choreography action. That makes sure that anything I do will be on this action. I'm going to go to my graph mode and just go back here. I'm just going to go to animate mode here, and I'm going to tumble out of my view. Now one thing you'll notice that if I hit 6 on my numpad and then I tumble, it's in this isometric flat view. I can't stand working in this just because of the way it kind of wigs out my eyes. So if I want to go back into perspective, a lot of times I'll hit the / key or the / key right above your enter, and it will take me back into perspective mode. Or what I'll do is I'll hit 1 on the numpad to go to the camera and then hit T and left click to tumble out of it. And that way I get the perspective that I want. Now, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually get rid of this walk, just delete it. Um, and let's have his hand start at frame 0. I'm going to zoom in here so I can see it. Start frame 0 and have his hand come up here and his shoulder come up a little bit. Okay, and then at frame 40, I'm going to have his hand come down here, rotate down, shoulder down, like that. Okay, so that's it. Just have his hand. Let's go to frame 20. Just do a little bit of animation stuff here. So I'll just have him bend his hand down like that. Okay. So now I just have him raising his arm. Now what I can do is, you'll notice here there's a bones folder and it says control clavicle left and control hand left, and those are the bones that I have animated. This is just like working in an action. So everything I've taught you about animating within the action that we did on the walk cycle, you can do right now in this choreography action. The only difference is this action data, or the animation data, is actually saved within the choreography file and is not an action. And so you got to keep that in mind when you're doing it. But I almost always animate in choreography actions because I can create animations in layers. So if I do this arm, let's right click on action, say new choreography action, and now in that action, let's say I grab his hips and I do this, and then I go to frame 40 and I go up like this. Just have him crouch down a little bit right here. Okay, so now what you see is actually two different choreography actions working together. And one of the nice things about working in choreography actions is I can export this as an action. So I'll just export action as choreography action 2, say act, and then hit save. Okay, now if I go up to actions, say import action, I can import this as an action and then drag it and drop it on my character. And then you'll notice that it's a shortcut to choreography action 2. And in this choreography action, the only one is control body, and I can see my graph there. So then I can get rid of this one if I don't want it. And now I've just got one choreography action and one shortcut to a choreography action that I exported. So working in layers is really nice because you can isolate bones, and you can export individual things as actions, and then you can right click on shortcut to will, and you can say bake all actions, and it will actually merge all those together and bake it all together. Put a keyframe on every frame so that they all work together. But really, unless you're absolutely needing to do that, I would just animate in a choreography action within a choreography. So it's really nice, and it's doing the same thing now, because that action that I exported is driving the body bone, or the control body, and the choreography action that's there is driving the arm or the hand and the clavicle. So you can see kind of how that works. So stacking choreography actions. Now, another thing that I can do is I like to rename these. So I'll rename it skeletal animation. And that way I know that that holds the bones. That's got all the bone data in it. So I know that that is, I'm just going to delete this right here. I know that this one holds bone data. So when I have that checked, I know that when I grab bones, let's go down and then go back up like this. Okay, so now we're doing the same thing we were. It's just got bone data in it, so it's got the control bones in there. Now what I'll do is, when I want to do facial animation, I just right click, say new choreography action, and then I rename this one to facial animation. Okay. And then when I get here, I can now right click on my window and say pose sliders, and I'm going to drag it over to this side. Facial poses, I'm going to go to phonemes, and then here I'm going to say ah, and I'm just going to drag the slider out a little bit so we can see it. I don't care what his face looks like right now, but you can see what I'm doing. Eyebrows up, eyebrows down, you know, whatever you want to do. Frown, smile. But now if I look in my facial animation folder, it's got a user properties folder because all my pose sliders are user properties. And it's got each of these, and you can see how the graph shows these. So now when I scrub, you can see what's going on with those. But that way I keep my facial animation and my skeletal animation separate, and it's easier to work with. But the one thing you have to do is if I'm going to go in and fix my skeletal animation, I have to make sure that I've clicked on it, because if I'm in facial animation and I click on a bone, you'll notice it just created a bones folder in there, and now it's not, I don't have control over that with the skeletal animation. So you just have to make sure that you're using the right choreography action. But this way also, when you save your choreography, it will save all of this animation data inside of it. So you don't have to save out an action. Your choreography contains everything that you need. And when you want to create something new to bring it into a choreography, all you do is you just open up an object or create a new object and drag it in. So choreographies are really powerful. They're basically what I like to animate in. Unless I'm doing a repetitive motion that I want to repeat over and over again, I will usually do only choreography animation. Now, one thing that I will do also is I will animate that repetitive motion in a choreography and then export the choreography action as an action and then bring it back in so that it repeats. And I do that just because I like being able to see it through my camera and not in an action where I don't have any plane of reference or anything like that. So I like animating in choreographies because it's a workspace for me to work in. But the thing that I love about it is the fact that everything in there is a shortcut to an object. There are no objects in choreographies. It's just a reference to your object. So keep that in mind when you're wanting to do animation in a choreography. You can bring a table, a chair, anything you've built in Animation Master, drop it into choreography and animate your character to it. Now, a few other things that I wanted to go over was this kind of stuff in a choreography. I'm going to shut these down just so that it's easier to work with here. Okay, one thing you'll notice, I'm going to close the pose sliders. One thing you'll notice here is these icons. Now, in these icons, I can turn it to whatever render mode I want to. Right now, it's just in wireframe. I can go to solid, but a camera doesn't render in solid, so it's just a wireframe. But like Will, I can hide him. I can render him wireframe, or I can render him shaded or shaded wireframe. Now these only go into effect except when you turn them off. These only go into effect when you hit 7 on your keyboard. 7 is the default. So I can set him to shaded mode, the ground to wireframe, shortcut to rim, same kind of thing. So they don't show when they're solid because they're just wireframe drawings anyways. But you can see now how I can isolate certain objects and render them certain ways. I can also make sure that I don't touch them so that I can't select the ground here. I can select Will like this. I can select these other objects, but I can't select the ground. And that's because I've turned it off right here, and that's very handy because you don't want to accidentally grab something and move it. So I turn it off. If I don't want to touch the camera, I turn that off, and now I can't touch the camera. The only way I can move it is if I'm in the camera view. And I'll tell you how to do that in a second. But go back to my bird's eye view. But so this is for holding, making sure that you can't touch or can't grab or can't modify those objects. One thing you might be tempted to do is to group things. If I grab these lights, it'll allow me to make a group. But I've found that unless they've fixed that in the latest version, it doesn't seem to work very well, and they don't tend to move all at once like you would expect them to. They tend to move on their own axes, and even when you have them in world space, it's kind of weird. So I just don't do that. I just move everything individually. The other thing is these icons right here show smoothing, object draw mode. So if I look here at Will, he's smoothed once. If I hit page down, you'll notice he he smooths down to no tessellation, then one up and one more. So one thing is if I hit 7 to go into default mode, it's going to use this too. So I'm going to actually change him to blocks. You can have him just like that. If you've got a really heavy character that's taking a lot to animate, I mean, I can still animate him just like this, but it will create blocks for me. I can go into flat shaded mode, or I can go into smooth shaded mode. So depending on how your computer is, if it's not the greatest video card, I would go into flat shaded mode, and then you don't have to worry about all the high tessellation and stuff. It'll draw it very quickly. Same thing with ground, I can do that the same. I usually just leave it like this, and then when I want to tessellate down, I'll just hit page down until it's all the way tessellated down. So that's that, and those are only for models that it will do that. These other buttons, what they do is it shows more than just the drivers. Now when it talks about drivers, it's talking about actions, things like that. If I look on my shortcut to will, all it's showing me is actions. If I uncheck that box, now it shows me bones, groups, everything that is in the model, it's showing me that. Now I almost never touch these in choreography, so I always leave them closed. The only time you use those is when you're maybe doing expressions and you want to, or maybe sometimes constraints. But other than that, I never really touch them, and I've done tons of animation in Animation Master and never had to touch that. So you can pretty much do everything you want without having to touch that, but it's there if you need to. So that's kind of those buttons. Now if we go up here to the toolbar, these of course are your manipulators, or your move, zoom, fit, turn. This is the interesting part right here. If I click on will, if I zoom into will here, if I click on will in choreography mode, you'll notice that he's just a box. What it's doing is it's moving his model bone. If you remember from the rigging tutorials, every model, no matter if there's bones in it or not, has what's called a model bone. The model bone is the parent to everything. And so I can grab that model bone and move it wherever I want to. Now in this mode, it's just going to move it along that plane. And you can animate the model bone. That's another thing that I do here is I say new choreography action, and I rename this model bone animation. And the reason why I do that is because I like to be able to animate the model bone separately from the other actions. So this is the model bone. You can scale him down here. You can do whatever you'd like to. Hit N on the keyboard to move him around. It's like your manipulator for moving. S is for size. R is for rotate, and he will always rotate around that pivot. But this is choreography mode, so I'm going to click on him again. This is choreography mode. This is standard. This is exactly what I just showed you. Scale, move, rotate, and just standard is just the box by itself. But the nice thing about this is you can scale it and translate it with that manipulator. Now the other things is this is action mode, or skeletal mode, and it's F8 on the keyboard. And if you go into that mode, that's the one you do your animation with. It shows the bones and allows you to do that. Now I can go into muscle mode, which then if I hit 0 on the keyboard takes me into vertex mode. This is where I can do vertex animation. So once again, I'm going to right click on action, say new choreography action, rename this to muscle animation. So if I have him at frame 40, I want to correct some of these things. I can start grabbing these and correcting them. I can do whatever I want to just kind of basically correct these poses. I don't recommend doing this in your animation, but I just want to show you what you can do. So I just start shaping him better, making him look right. But now what you'll notice is when you go to that muscle animation under splines, now it's got splines that I have moved around and animated, and you can see the graph for each spline. So you can look at it kind of what I've done. So that's muscle mode. So you can animate everything in a choreography. Now over here, this is interesting, and these I almost never use. They're more there for kind of convenience sake, but I never really use them. If I go into back into choreography mode, I've got Will here, and say I want to make an adjustment to his model. Well, one thing I can do is I can double click on his model, come back out here and say I want his waist bigger. I'm just gonna blow it up like this. Now you'll notice in the choreography it just did that for me. Let me go up to Window, Tile vertically, and you can see this. So anything I do to the model, make him a little fatty here, a little more heavy. But you can see it working in the choreography. Now this is not doing anything in the choreography. This is just manipulating the model itself. And so it's not something that I'm doing in the choreography. It's just manipulating the model. So don't ever think you're animating in the model. Just animate in the choreography. But if you go here, this is one way you can do it. I can adjust the model here. I can go into rigging mode. I can do whatever I want here. Or I can do it here. If I go back here, I click on Will and go into choreography mode, and then I can click on Bones mode. What it will do is it will take me into that model view within the choreography. It'll snap him back to his position, and I can adjust point weighting, I can adjust bones and everything right there, or I can go into modeling mode and change the model. So if I click over here, go into modeling mode, and then if I grab this point and move it, you'll notice that it's moving in the model too, because what I'm actually doing is changing the model. So these are useful, but I don't ever use them because I like to make sure that I'm doing it on the model and nothing's going wrong within the model. Call me conservative or something, but I just like to do it that way because I don't like messing up what I've got in the model in here. I just like working on the model itself. So that's kind of those buttons up there. Now, the rest of these you kind of know. Magnet mode, offset, mirror mode. Don't really use any of that in choreographies. But like when you're animating in choreographies, say at frame 0, I have him right here. And let's go to the model bone animation just so I make sure I'm on the right one. Click him here, and then at frame 40, I want him to scale, or oops, I grabbed the roll handle, scale down a bit like this, okay? So now he's doing all that animation simultaneously. And I just want to make sure that, I've got my bias handles checked up here so that when I click on it, I can grab my bias, oops, and just kind of play with it if I want to. So it's just kind of just ways to play with things in choreographies. Now I'm just going to maximize this window. That's pretty much how you work in choreographies. Now one thing is if I go into my render or my camera view by hitting 1 on the numpad, some things I can change. I can go into my shortcut to camera, open up the triangle, and I can change my background to black, or I can change it to whatever I want. But I have to remember I did it on frame 15 or whatever I was scrubbed to, so I'm actually going to grab that, delete it, go back to frame 0, and then change it to black and hit OK. Okay, so it's changed there. Now I can go out to frame 20, I can grab the color and change it to blue, so it fades to blue, and go out here, change it to that blue, and then I can come out here and change it back to red. Okay, so I can animate almost everything. I can also animate the focal length. So at frame 0, let's say it's 70. Go to frame 30, let's say it's 30, so it zooms way out. And I'm not moving the camera at all, I'm just animating the focal length. And then let's go a little further here. And let's say it's 85, so zoomed in on him here. So I'm actually not moving the camera at all, I'm messing with the focal length. Render options, you can set all these on the original camera, or you can just animate them in the camera, and you don't even really animate them, but I can turn on multi-pass, turn it off, I can do all the settings for the camera right here, and the output settings I can do it here. And that way, your choreography, the camera in your choreography, whenever you open the choreography, it will automatically have these camera settings. So when you want to render, it's automatic. The other thing I can turn on and off are these boxes right here where TV safe and title safe. So I can turn them both on, so you'll notice title safe and TV safe. I like to have them just the way it is right there. I don't necessarily need the title safe, but that way you can make sure that your actions stay within, your animation stays within that box so that it doesn't bleed off on some TVs. But that's pretty much it for choreographies and all the things that you can do in them. I would suggest for simpler things, for animating or for stacking actions and things like that, I would suggest looking at the very simple ones on hash.com. They're very simple tutorials about stacking actions and things like that, and that will help you a little bit to understand that. But from now on, we're going to be animating in choreographies and using choreographies to do the animations that we have, or that are going to be coming up. So choreographies are a very powerful tool in Hash. I like to use them because I can do all kinds of stuff without playing around with the objects themselves, and it's a good place to experiment. I can grab things and move them around. I can place them. I can rotate them, scale them, do whatever I want, change colors, change backgrounds, and without actually changing the objects themselves. So it's a very fun place to kind of play around in. One last thing is, if you want to see what your oops, that's a bad shot. What your object looks like rendered, what you can do is go up here to render mode or render lock mode. The keyboard command is Q. If you push Q and then you right click and drag, it will render, and you'll see on the bottom, it will render that piece for you right there. Just hit escape and it'll go back. The other one to do is Shift Q. It does a progressive render, so if you don't want to have to wait for it to do a full render, you just right click drag and it does a progressive render for you. That's not anti-aliased or anything, but it gives you a good idea as to what the final render is going to look like. So that's pretty much it for choreographies. And in the next tutorial, we will be doing a run cycle.